Local authorities in Lima, Peru, keep working to extinguish an intense fire in a building near San Martin Square that started on Thursday and kept ravaging the edifice through Friday's early morning. The new cabinet of ministers of Antigua and Barbuda, led by Prime Minister Gaston Brownie, swore in for a 5-year term. The Russian government warned of the legal consequences of an eventual delivery to Ukraine of Russian armament from third countries. From the headquarters of TeleSUR English in Havana, Cuba, this is From the South. I'm your anchor, Gladys Quesada. And now we begin with the news. Local authorities in Lima, Peru, keep working to extinguish an intense fire in a building near San Martin Square that started on Thursday and kept ravaging the edifice through Friday's early morning. The blaze broke out in the midst of the so-called March for the Takeover of Lima and started off the roof of a building, although it has reportedly spread already to the second floor and the various balconies of the property. Firefighters arrived at the scene to attend to the emergency immediately. The general commander of the fire department, Luis Ponce Lajara, indicated that there are no people living in the place, but they are working to evacuate all nearby neighbors. The fire department chief did not rule out the possibility that the fire could spread due to the large proportions that can be seen. However, he asked the protesters who are in the center of Lima to allow them to enter this street and thus avoid a tragedy. The cause of the fire is still under investigation. And also in Peru, the rally of the Cuatro Suyos, or Lima's takeover, goes on as the protesters from all over the country keep demanding President Dina Boluarte to step down, the convening of early elections for 2023, the closure of the Congress, and the release of the ousted President Pedro Castillo. The protests started on December 7th after Castillo's removal from office and have been met with heavy repression by the military and the police, who used tear gas bombs, live ammunition, and other anti-riot violent methods. So far, indigenous people, farmers, and other social sectors are in Lima and assure they will not retrieve until their demands are met. On Friday, Antigua and Barbuda's new cabinet of ministers, led by the Prime Minister Gaston Brownie, was sworn in for a third term after the ruling Labour Party secured the victory in the legislative elections of the Caribbean country. The ruling party obtained 1,295 votes against 621 for Alistair Thomas of the opposition United Progressive Party and Jamel Knight of the National Democratic Alliance. In a first for Antigua and Barbuda's history, Brownie, 55, is the first executive leader to win 3 consecutive general elections and consolidate his position in the next 5 years. General Attorney Steve Roy Benjamin was also sworn in. The Labour Party won 2 of the 3 seats in the constituency, according to preliminary figures revealed by the Electoral Commission of Antigua and Barbuda. More than 60,000 citizens were called to vote for the renewal of the Senate and the House of Representatives. In Brazil, the National Federal Police initiated the first phase of the Operation Lesa Patria, seeking to identify the participants in the assault of the headquarters of power last January the 8th. This was announced by the Ministry of Justice and Public Security. The investigation will look into the crimes of violent abolition of the democratic rule of law, coup d'etat, qualified damage, criminal association, incitement to crime, and destruction of specially protected goods. On January the 8th, hundreds of supporters of the former President Jair Bolsonaro invaded and stormed the headquarters of the National Congress, the presidency, and the Supreme Court, demanding a military intervention to overthrow the government of President Luiz Inácio Lula da Silva. Some of the arrested were released, but almost 1,500 remain imprisoned and could be charged with terrorism and attempted coup d'etat. Now we move on to other topics. In Uruguay, the weather phenomenon La Niña is responsible for the drought that is negatively impacting agricultural producers and exporters. According to weather and climate experts, the high temperature phenomenon could have an even greater impact in the upcoming months. The government has extended the agricultural emergency so that producers can have access to credits and other palliative measures. In this sense, the Public Energy Company and the State Technical University announced measures for several thousands of agricultural producers who are spending more to bring water to their farmland. The Ministry of Livestock, Agriculture and Fisheries will also provide the list of producers who are requesting the government assistance. In China, the number of people killed by a snow avalanche on a mountain road in Tibet has risen to 20. The avalanche took place at around 7 p.m. local time on Tuesday at the exit of a tunnel on a highway linking the towns of Ningxi and Medog in southwestern Tibet. As a result, several people were trapped in their vehicles. China's Emergency Management Ministry sent a disaster response team to the region. Rescue teams are currently trying to locate survivors as bulldozers remove snow so as to reach overturned vehicles. And more than 300 cities and municipalities in the Philippines were flooded due to the heavy rains since early this year. According to the National Risk Reduction and Management Council, 82 landslides occurred throughout the country, with a total of 12 people injured and 7 others missing. Meanwhile, as a result of the floods, 264,800 people have been temporarily displaced, among which over 190,000 are in evacuation centers. In this regard, 1,600 houses and 194 infrastructures were devastated as a result of the natural phenomenon, with damages to the agricultural sector exceeding $8 million. Experts confirmed on Friday that temperatures in parts of Greenland are warmer than they have been in 1,000 years.
These locations on the Greenland ice sheet has warmed a lot. So actually, when we put it into the context of the climate we can see in the ice cores that goes about 1,000 years back, then it's the warmest that it has been in the last 1,000 years. So that's the major finding of this research, that you can say the global warming signal that we see all over the world has also found its way to these very remote locations on the Greenland ice sheet. Yes.
Let's take a short break now, but first, remember you can follow us on our TikTok account at TeleSUR English, in which you will be able to see news in different formats, news updates, and more. Other stories coming up, stay with us. Welcome back. In Davos, the head of the International Monetary Fund, Kristalina Georgieva, warned that Western subsidies to fight climate change and encourage the transition to clean energy sources risk hitting developing and emerging markets. In the framework of the World Economic Forum in Davos, Switzerland, the senior official referred to the Inflation Reduction Act passed by the United States President Joe Biden, which contains sweeping subsidies and tax cuts worth around $300 billion for reducing greenhouse gas emissions, making it the largest ever U.S. program to combat climate change. In the meantime, the European Union is considering to respond in kind, amid fears that the Inflation Reduction Act will encourage business and move factories and production to the U.S. at a time when it is trying to strengthen its industrial base.
My biggest concern is that something that in principle is very good to accelerate the transition to the green economy by using public money to step up private investments. This is what the US is doing. This is what we just heard from Bruno. Europe is doing. May not serve well the emerging markets and the developing world.
And the International Criminal Court prosecutor Karim Khan pledges to reduce the gap between the International Court and affected communities at the opening of the 2023 judicial year for the court. According to Khan, they seek to deploy innovation and technology to serve the common good.
To reduce the gap between the court and the affected communities, with your help, to reduce the gap between the promises and commitments states have made and the actual delivery of support, which has been promised not to us as elected officials, but has been promised to the most vulnerable.
In France, more than 2 million people took to the streets on Thursday, January 19th, on the first day of mobilizations against the government's pension reform project. According to the General Confederation of Labor, the CGT, the 8 unions have called for a new date of protests on Tuesday, January 31st. The unions argue the reform is unacceptable and goes against the interests of the population. Moreover, they add that the government must renounce the postponement of the legal retirement age to 64 years and the acceleration of the extension of the contribution period to 43 years. According to the Confederal Secretary of the CGT, Catherine Ferret, their fight against the reform is not a process that happens only in the Assembly, but it must also be taken to the streets to make the government back down. And on Thursday, after the French unions mobilized against the pension reform, the government spokesperson Olivier Véran declared that the mobilization was important. It was a movement of democratic expression, but Véran insisted that the reform is essential and must be carried out.
Session yesterday was important. It was expected. We respect it. It is a movement of democratic expression. It is not the first time, far from it, that a reform concerns the social system and especially pensions, and indeed the people who are not in agreement with this reform, whether they decide to say so through a strike or through a demonstration, we respect them, and we are not asking everyone to agree with the reform we are carrying out. What we want is, first of all, to explain that this reform is essential and that we must do it.
And in Andalusia, Spain, health workers go on strike indefinitely started on Friday for better conditions to perform their duties. The strike was convened by the Union of Primary Care Physicians, the staff of Andalusian primary care, family doctors and pediatricians of health centers and other points of emergency. The action was taken in the face of the reiterated lack of response from the state health authorities to the workers' demands of increasing the number of doctors in the health centers and the need to improve both the salary and the time they dedicate to each patient. The unions assert that these are not optimal conditions for the exercise of medicine and add that the current labor crisis in the health sector is well known by the current government, which has offered no response to most of the requests. And in the United Kingdom, the United Workers' Union announced on Friday 10 more strikes in the coming weeks and threatened with further protests unless a salary agreement is reached with the government. Union General Secretary Sharon Graham said that instead of protecting the National Health Service, or NHS, and negotiate an end to the dispute, the government has shamefully chosen to demonize ambulance workers. Graham said that the ministries are deliberately misleading the public about live coverage and about who is to blame for excess deaths. It has also been announced that on February the 6th, ambulance personnel will go on strike, joining the thousands of nurses who will participate in what is considered the potentially largest walkout in the history of the NHS. Earlier this week, teachers, machinists, and nurses also announced new strikes for February and March. And we have more news coming up after a final short break, so stay with us. Welcome back. On Friday, Kremlin spokesperson Dmitry Peskov said President Putin had met with the Security Council to discuss the course of the special operation in Donbass. Peskov said the meeting was attended by the different state authorities, including representatives of the Federation Council, the State Duma, the Security Council, the Kremlin, together with officials from several national ministries. On Wednesday, Putin had said that Russia's victory in the conflict in Ukraine is inevitable, thanks to the unity and cohesion of the Russian people, the courage and the heroism of the fighters, and the work of the military-industrial complex. The special military operation started on February the 24th, 2022. On Friday, the Russian government warned of the legal consequences of an eventual delivery to Ukraine of Russian armament from third countries. At his daily telephone press conference, Kremlin spokesperson Dmitry Peskov condemned the new U.S. statements trying to persuade several Latin American countries to transfer Russian military equipment to Ukraine. In this regard, Peskov warned that legal restrictions on supplies to third countries are very important in this matter, because every supply imposes certain obligations on the countries receiving military products. The United States on Thursday announced new military assistance for Ukraine valued at up to $2.5 billion, including hundreds of armored vehicles and support for air defense. The assistance also includes 59 Bradley fighting vehicles and 90 Stryker armored personnel carriers. Ukraine's President Volodymyr Zelensky on Friday urged Western allies to deliver tanks to Ukraine at a key defense conference in Germany, although the Kremlin denied the weapons could change anything on the battlefield. At a U.S.-organized donors meeting, Zelensky implored Western allies to accelerate arms deliveries in the face of the Russian onslaught, while the U.S. Defense Secretary Lloyd Austin urged Western allies to deepen even further support for Ukraine. On the other hand, the Kremlin responded by accusing the West of harboring a dramatic illusion that Ukraine could win on the battlefield, adding that the conflict was developing in an upward spiral. Israel's far-right government is working on a bill to further restrict popular protests in the country, public broadcaster Kan revealed on Friday. According to the source, the regulation will require police permits for any demonstration involving more than 100 people and will allow uniformed officers to expel people who could disturb the peace. In addition, officers will also be authorized to impose fines of up to $1,466 on those who disobey police instructions or fail to leave the area after being asked to do so. And the armed militia group known as the Cooperative for the Development of the Congo killed 7 people in a displaced persons camp on Friday. The United Nations peacekeeping mission in the African nation reported that the attack took place at the Plain Zavo camp, 9 kilometers east of the Jugu in Ituri province. UN peacekeepers were deployed immediately after the attack to secure the camp. The attack followed the discovery of mass graves containing the bodies of 49 people in other villages, about 30 kilometers east of the town of Bunia in Ituri. The same militia has been blamed for the killings. Due to insecurity in the African nation, at least 12 humanitarian organizations reduced their presence and operations in these territories.
Communities since the start of December.
The African Development Bank announced on Thursday that the African continent is expected to have an economic growth of at least 4% during 2023. Africa's biannual macroeconomic outlook and performance report indicated that the continent's gross domestic product will grow by about 4% in 2023 and 2024 despite multiple challenges. This represents a slightly faster growth than in 2022 and is above the global average growth rate of 2.7% to 3.2%. The president of the African entity, Akinwumi Adesina, also stated that growth in all 5 African regions was positive in 2022 and that the outlook for the coming 2 years is expected to be stable. And we have come to the end of this news brief. But remember, you can find this and many other stories on our website at telesurenglish.net. And also, if you feel so inclined, please join us on social media for all the latest news. We are on Facebook, Twitter, Instagram, Telegram, and TikTok. For TeleSUR English, I'm your anchor, Gladys Quesada. Thank you for watching.
In a